Hey there, this is Christine. Thanks for tuning into my Mostly Keto Kitchen. What I would like to talk about today is fiber. So we had talked about fruit in a previous video, and I showed how whole fruits have about 10 times as much fiber in them as dried fruit and fruit juice. And so I'd like to talk a little bit more about why it is that fiber is important. So what is it doing when we eat it? Now, I've got some different types of fibers that are shown over here. The green here are some examples of soluble fibers, things like pectin and inulin and psyllium. And then down here in blue, I've got an example of an insoluble fiber. And so here we're looking at cellulose. Now, you'll notice the word poly is written multiple times here. We've got polygalactose, polyfructose, polysaccharide. Saccharide is just another way of saying sugar. Polyglucose. So what these things are is poly just means many. So you've got many sugars all linked together. A galactose is almost the same thing as a glucose. There's just one little carbon where the OH group is going in a different direction. Fructose you've seen before. And then here's a polyglucose. It's kind of interesting because we eat polyglucose and we digest it really well in the form of starch. And so starch and cellulose are super similar. There's only one little difference in a bond that whether it goes up or whether it goes down, that's what determines whether it's cellulose or it's starch. And starch is in things like rice and pasta and potatoes and oatmeal and bread. You know, so much of what we eat in the grain category is just made up of starch. And starch is also in carrots and beets, and we've got all sorts of examples of starch, and that's the primary way that we get glucose molecules. But it ends up that this type, so that if it's cellulose, that's more like wood pulp, and we don't digest that. And so it's just that one little tiny structural difference. But bacteria like this, and similarly bacteria will eat these other types here, the soluble types too. So one of the reasons why we eat fiber is because we're feeding all those bacteria that are in our body. But there's actually a more important reason why we need to eat the fiber. And that I'm showing over here. So if you can imagine, this is an intestinal wall, and so you're just sort of looking into the intestine. What happens is that the insoluble guy, so the guy in blue here, creates kind of like a mesh. And that lines that mesh against the wall of the intestine. And then the green guys, they're more jelly-like, and they go and they fill in the holes in the mesh. And so that's what's happening here. So why is that important? Well, it helps slow down the amount of fructose and other sugars that are going to be passing through the intestinal wall, going into the portal vein, which will then lead straight to the liver. So you're basically slowing down the fructose absorption by laying down this mesh inside the intestine. So this is why it's important to eat a whole fruit, because in a whole fruit, you're going to get the soluble and the insoluble along with the delicious fructose, and it's going to be a healthy snack for you. But if you start looking for fiber in places that are in processed foods, and here I'll show you a picture of a Nature Valley granola bar. So you'll see the word chicory. Chicory is an example of inulin. And so that's good. Okay, so it's nice there's some soluble in there, but none of the other ingredients in this list is an insoluble fiber. So you can't create that mesh. And it's the mesh with the insoluble, with the jelly part, that then prevents the fructose from coming in. So important, like it's better to go and eat a piece of whole fruit and have a handful of nuts than it is to go and get some kind of processed bar type product. All right, well, there's more to talk about with fiber. I think so tomorrow I'll probably address here the recommendations from the American Heart Association for the amount of fiber that we eat. But thanks for tuning in.